the cloud. I'm going to go over to participants and let everybody in. People muted. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your patience and thanks for joining. If you are a participant and not currently on mute, please do me a favor and go ahead and mute yourself. We will have plenty of time for question and answers with our expert panel in not very long at all, and I appreciate you being here. My name is Eric Feldman. I'm the Associate Director of FIU in Washington, D.C., reporting here live from the nation's capital. This afternoon for our second Panther Alumni event week hosted by FIU in DC. Make sure folks are on mute. I think I did not seem to set it to auto mute people. So again, if you're not on mute currently, help me out and mute yourself for the time being. If this is the first event that you are in that is hosted by FIU in Washington, D.C., a little bit about us. We have three pillars of operations. One, we are advocates at the federal level for FIU's research programs and student access programs, making sure that our members of Congress and relevant federal agencies know what we're up to and that our knowledge can inform their legislative proposals and that they can keep supporting our research programs. Idea Exchange are larger events that we host that go beyond just the FIU community and convenes as speakers and participants, think tank researchers, federal government officials, and congressional staffs. And the Talent Lab, that's what I run. That's what we're doing here today. These are all of the programs that help our students and alumni get internships and jobs in DC, including through learning how the policy process works here in DC. Some of that we'll be talking about today. More people in the waiting room here. Admit. Oh, Santiago might be back in. We do have three guests with us today as we discuss space industry. Oh, and I think I see Santiago is on via video. So that was perfect timing as we get to introduce him. Santiago Foldvari is the Director, Space Industry at the Australian Trade and Investment Commission at the Embassy of Australia here in Washington. Denisse Aranda is also an FIU alumna. She's the Principal Contamination Control Engineer at Blue Origin, and not an alumna, but I'll make her honorary alumna for today. Someone I've met for this event and have really enjoyed interactions with so far and enthusiastic to have participate, Dr. Diane Howard. She's the Chief Counsel for Space Commerce at the United States Department of Commerce, which is based here in Washington. Since we might have some engineers on the call today or other people who are interested in engineering, I want to make sure that you know that next week we have one more engineering kind of focused event. It's kind of meant for engineering students that are going to a particular conference called BEA, hence the flyer there. But I'll tell you what, if you're here, if you're seeing this flyer and you're interested in this event, you are welcome to sign up for our Washington Careers for Engineers events, which Careers, there's a link in the chat, has the Vice President of Government Affairs for Virgin Galactic, and also thank you to today's panelist, Santiago, for connecting me to, and FIU graduate, Mike Lopez, who's an optical engineer at NASA, and I'm checking the room, I think is in the room with us right now. So hi, Mike, if you can hear me. All right, and last but not least, I want to make sure you know that you can go to flyin.fiu.edu and apply for the 3-day policy seminar that we are currently recruiting for called The Future of Environmental Resilience for Economic Growth and National Security. I don't want to spend too much time before talking to our panel. So if you care about the environment, the economy, or national security, or any combination of those three things, please visit the link I just put in the chat and learn about how you can participate in our 3-day policy seminar. So the chat is open. What I would like to see is those who are in the audience to take a moment, quickly introduce yourself. What about this topic drew you here today? What's your connection to FIU? What are your goals as it pertains to this topic? The way Q&A is going to work is that you can ask questions in the chat at any time. I'll keep an eye on the chat. If I see an interesting question, as soon as the time is right, I will call on you to ask that over video if you can, so that our discussants can see and hear you directly. That's a great way for me to know you have a question, so put them in the chat as you have them. So I'm going to start a conversation with our panelists. And the first question really, I think, is the one to understand what we mean by space industry. From my vantage point, and I'm hardly an expert on this, which is why I have our three panelists, it seems that space has gone from something that was almost exclusively a governmental domain to one that is a strong public-private partnership with a lot of private companies involved. I'd love to hear from any or all of the three panelists on overall, what is the timeline over which this has occurred? What are the implications of this, good and bad? And are we at a point where either government or private business could ever do space without each other at this point? Whoever would like to jump in on that?
I'll jump right in on that. I can tell you that there has been, first of all, there have been public-private partnerships in space for many, many years. I know Jeffrey Mamber, who's the founder of NanoRacks, which is a company that's often in space news and likely one that you're familiar with. And he started a public-private partnership back in like 1999 or something, MirCorp, and that was an international public-private partnership. However, the private sector has been involved in space since the 60s with telecommunication satellites. The first public-private partnership was Intelsat, which privatized, I think, in 2001. And the commercial launch industry started with the private sector in the 80s, mid 80s, after Europe started getting involved with the Arianespace. So there's been involvement for a long, long time. I'll let my colleagues on the panel jump in, but to answer your question as to whether or not there will be a time when one will take over from the other, private will take over from government. I don't think we need to look at it as an either or proposition. I think we bring different things. The private sector brings different things, and you can see that with the democratization that's going on right now. So you can see really a role for government, particularly when we're talking about exploration and use, but then you can see how some of the innovative technologies like Blue, like where Denisse is working, can really do things in a much more nimble and responsive way. And so there's room for both. So I'll yield to my colleagues now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think I've had a really great opportunity to see, because I worked 8 years at NASA Alumni Research Center in Hampton, Virginia, and I'm currently working in the private sector with Blue Origin, working on their heavy lift rocket, New Glenn. And so I've seen it from the engineering perspective, and it's a really beautiful partnership that we have. What the private industry has done is that we have made space accessible to low Earth orbit. We can send astronauts, payloads, things to low Earth orbit in a much cheaper way because we're using reusable rockets. So this frees up agencies like NASA and ESA and all the other governments to focus on really deep space exploration that requires decades of research to go outside the Kepler belts. A great example of this is one of the projects that I worked on. It's called the SAGE-3 instrument. It is an Earth observation satellite that's currently on the International Space Station. You could see it with the naked eye. It took us 10 years to build it. I spent 5 years of my career just working on this one instrument. And so by giving low Earth orbit to the private companies, you're enabling these really difficult projects to expand beyond the Earth's orbit. So it's a really great partnership for that.
Yeah, I would just add to that, and I come at it from the government side, but most of my day job is engaging with industry. I would add that government's role can be to, well, it should be to regulate, so that the use of space is safe and secure. But it's also to pave the ground so that companies can succeed and can up their own ambitions. For example, by stimulating the conversation about going from Moon to Mars for deep space exploration, or even something as mundane but incredibly important as making sure that things like spectrum pricing is competitive and allows companies to operate in different environments. So for example, you see all these satellite constellations. Well, in order to get the communications from space into Earth, they need these licenses. The bands that they transmit from are very, very limited and scarce. And so the proper allocation of scarce resources is an area where government can facilitate commercial operations.
I'm going to throw in on that because I also work for the government, and our office in the Department of Commerce has a really interesting role. By statute, we are industry's advocates in the executive branch, and that's really gone beyond just the executive branch, which is like the departments and agencies like the Department of Transportation, Department of Commerce, Department of Homeland Security, to also include independent agencies. NASA is definitely included in there, but also the FCC, which does the spectrum management that Santiago was just talking about. And I would like to say that, you know, it's interesting. I kind of perked up when you said that it's the role of government, that government should regulate. And I think that there is some truth to that there is a definite role for government to oversee private activities in space, partly because the Outer Space Treaty says state parties governments must because of Article 6. However, I would say that they have to be effective regulations, and there's been a real trend in the last few years to make sure that regulations are streamlined, that they're effective, that they're not cumbersome. I know that people at Denisse's company have been very actively involved in some of the efforts to streamline the launch license regulations. So it's not just that the role of government is to regulate, but it's to regulate effectively and in a way that is responsive to the needs of industry so that industry can thrive, so that industry can flourish, because there are definitely societal benefits when we have a thriving, not only does space make our lives better on Earth, but to have a thriving industry is a very good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the roles, thank you for that, because it's absolutely true. One of the things that I spend a lot of my time on is working with companies to invest and help us create a globally competitive ecosystem in Australia of space companies. And so regulation is necessary, but it needs to be clear to investors. It needs to be streamlined. It can't be cumbersome. It can't be unclear. So yes, absolutely. All those things are necessary and an important role that government plays in space policy and space industry.
Right.
Yeah, your country has a new space law too. You have a new space law in Australia, don't you?
There is, and there's also a new space agency that's come on board in July 2018. So it's all relatively new to Australia, even though Australia has been a contributor to the space ecosystem for a long time. So some of the first TV signals from Neil Armstrong's moon landing were relayed through Australia. But as a formal kind of space actor, Australia is a relatively new contributor.
You all are really on top of the types of things that I hope we are going to discuss today, because the two of the next questions I had kind of did center on whether the role of government was to regulate or encourage space industry development, and also what treaties and regulations govern the use of space. I know both of those things have come up, but to make sure all three of you have a chance to chime in on either of those things, was there anything else that anyone wanted to contribute around the role of government in this, or what the actual treaties and regulations are that govern the industry?
I would just add that space, the fascinating thing about space, and where there's a lot of opportunity for students, and I'm sure we'll get to that in a minute, is that no one company can do it all. No one country can do it all. And not one sector can do it. So this is not a private sector effort, and it's not a public sector effort. Everything has to be a collaboration. So there are documents, for example, the Artemis program, which today the Biden administration said will continue as one of the focus areas for NASA, which is a Moon to Mars effort to replace the Apollo programs. And countries are signing on to the Artemis Accords. And that really means that countries are trying to identify where they can be global contributors to global Moon to Mars efforts. So Australia signed to the Artemis Accords, and Australia is looking at our own capabilities, and we're road mapping these as we speak, to see where we can best contribute. We do believe we have capabilities in robotics and in other areas, but a lot of countries are doing this. Alliances are being formed and solidified. And that goes for government and industry as well. So everything's sort of a partnership.
And norms are getting created, and that's a pretty key and very important aspect to the Artemis Accords. You asked Eric about whether or not governments could encourage but also regulate, and I want to just bring to the participants' attention that in some of this domestic space law that we have here in the US, they include both the encourage, facilitate, and protect, as well as the protecting of safety and regulating in the launch law. And also in our office, we do advocacy, as I mentioned before, but we are also merging with the Commercial Remote Sensing Regulatory Affairs Office, which is another part of the Department of Commerce, NOAA. And so you can have those two functions together. And I think actually it's, government should be doing things to both encourage, but also to make sure that they're responsible activities. At the same time, you have to deconflict them and make sure that there isn't undue influence placed on either side of it. And the other question that you asked was whether or not there were like treaties and things, and absolutely there are. The Magna Carta of outer space, and it's really the foundational, the foundational document upon which the Artemis Accords is based is the Outer Space Treaty. And what the Artemis Accords does is, Santiago is absolutely right. This is like the beginning of the next phase of space exploration. And it really does help unpack how those partnerships, international, which has been from the very beginning, international cooperation has been an important part, but also it does. The Artemis Accords do take into consideration the fact that the private sector will partner with NASA and with governments in going forward. But the wonderful thing about the Artemis Accords is that it does build upon the Outer Space Treaty, and it sort of fleshes out or tells us how we can implement Article 9, to get really geeky on you, instead of just having these kind of high level, lofty, aspirational statements about we will avoid harmful interference. The Artemis Accords actually tell you how. If you're doing things in sort of close proximity on the moon or elsewhere, how we establish those areas of deconfliction, and then we do these things with transparency. So it's a really exciting time right now because we're building off of the legal framework that was put into place from like mid-60s forward, and now you see, as we start getting into these new activities, us starting to really take those ideas and put them into practice in a way that makes sense for those partnerships going forward. It's exciting.
Thank you all. I want to turn to Denisse for a second. And Denisse, as you already mentioned, you worked for NASA prior to Blue Origin. So from the engineering perspective, you have this unique perspective on this panel of having worked for a public and private entity. And
absolutely,
I thought of you earlier this week, as I might be too early to comment on what the implications of it are, but I noticed that one of the projects that Jeff Bezos mentioned that he was resigning as Amazon CEO to focus on was Blue Origin.
It is. We're super excited.
Feel free to comment on that. But other than what you mentioned in terms of the low Earth orbit aspect, what do you see as a difference between working for a public or private space company, from the working condition and promotion opportunities to what impact you think the organizations are having?
Sure, absolutely. I love this question. And also for the participants, thank you for introducing yourself in the chat. It's really interesting to see the backgrounds. I see that we've got some people interested in policy. We've got a couple engineers, someone that worked at Goddard. So thank you for doing that. It helps us tailor our answers to things that you're interested in. So please feel free to give feedback as we talk. So Eric, to your question, we were talking about earlier, Santiago, you mentioned the Artemis program. I will mention that Blue Origin is the prime contractor for that. So we've got our Blue Moon lander, which is awesome if you want to look it up online. And so we're providing a lot of systems engineering support, and we're kind of the lead in partnership with some of the other places like Lockheed Martin to develop that. As you mentioned, I did work for 8 years at NASA Langley Research Center. I also interned at Glenn and Cape Canaveral, and I've gotten to work on really cool things. The first one I worked on as an aerospace engineer was an inflatable heat shield for planetary reentry. It was awesome. We've tested it already on Mars and on low Earth orbit. I've worked on high altitude radiation balloon experiments. And as I mentioned, I spent 5 years of my life on the SAGE-3 project, which is currently in orbit. You could see it in space. It's really cool. There are a lot of differences between working in government as an engineer versus the private sector. So I'll start with like the really simple ones. For starters, here in the private sector at Blue Origin specifically, the workforce is much younger, significantly much younger, and they're also a lot more diverse from backgrounds, races, ethnicities. It's a lot more like an open environment. And I think it's because the pace of innovation is so much greater in the private sector than in the government. But the biggest difference of all, and I'm so glad you mentioned Jeff Bezos, Eric, is our funding model. Even within the private space companies, Blue Origin stands out from SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, and all of the other competitors in that we are privately funded by one man and one man only, and that is Jeff Bezos. And that allows us such creative freedom. We don't answer to a board of directors. We don't answer to Wall Street. We don't have to bid for contracts, although we win them because we do good things. But the fact that we have one man with a consolidated vision means that we can do judgment, engineering judgment for what it is. And that to me is, as an engineer, so liberating. We can take the liberties of choosing the right engines, choosing the right systems engineering approach, and just have to convince one person. And he's on board 100%. Another thing that I'd like to point out is I mentioned just how long some of these projects take when I was in government, especially deep space probes. I mean, you look at Voyager, there's some of these are 40-year lifespans. I mean, you're talking about generations of engineers that work on a single project. And one of the hardest things for me when I worked at NASA was holding our breath every time that there was an administration change. So every year we have to hold our breath for the congressional budget. I've been furloughed so many times. I've been, blood, sweat, and tears into a project that has scientific merit for the people of Earth, and it gets canned for reasons that are outside of our control. And that's really disheartening. So to have a unified vision at Blue Origin, for example, where we have this vision of just having millions of people working and living in space, and having that not be interrupted by anything other than just fueled by passion is really, really a stark difference, and a place that I'm really happy to be in. And I'm not motivated by this type of stuff, but if you are, I get paid almost 3 times what I got paid at NASA. So there's that too. It's a lot.
Yeah,
I have to say, what you just said, Denisse, really resonates for me right now, because I do work for government, but I am relatively new to government. I came from academia and the practicing law, and before that I was in business for a long, long time. So it's been a real shift of paradigm to recalibrate my expectations to work in this environment where even, I mean, yes, I'm going through my first change in administration right now, and it is unlike anything I've ever experienced. Yeah. That said, just the amount of clearances that you have to go through to get something out of the building, it's incredible. So to have that unified vision, and to have the person who has this vision in your instance is a really exceptional human being. I was at your facility in Seattle, right near the lake, and
yeah, that's where I work.
Like a I don't know what you call it, like a big round thing that can go to the bottom of the sea. It's like,
yes. That's in the Jules Verne building.
Yes, yes. And it's the most whimsical, fantastic. I mean, if there's ever something that would inspire people to be as creative and innovative and quirky as possible. Somebody liked my hair. Clearly I'm quirky. So I think that's a wonderful thing. And it really is wonderful to hear you talk about it from the standpoint of the two different things contrasted, because really, as government agencies go, NASA is pretty creative too, but those timelines can really get you. And not having Congress has the power of the purse, so you're following a vision that's sort of an executive branch vision, and then it keeps flip-flopping, and it's a challenge.
It's hard.
Well, the three of you are really driving this conversation here, in that I heard the topic of the new presidential administration brought up, and changes in government. So is there a way that both our 46th president and or the 117th Congress is affecting your jobs? So like Denisse, I'm curious if you're saying that doesn't affect you at all, or it does affect you because of policy changes we're expecting. Santiago, you work for the Australian government, but at the embassy here in Washington. What are any of your expectations for what policies might change or might remain the same, and how is it affecting you directly at this point?
So I can take that quickly. The previous administration obviously brought space to the fore. So we saw the creation of a new branch of the military service and the Space Force. We saw very aggressive, and I don't mean that in the pejorative term. I just mean it in terms of how ambitious the deadlines were for landing the next crew on the moon, including the first female astronaut, which I'm very supportive of, on the lunar surface by 2024, and then on to Mars in the 2030s. And then with a change in administration, there was a little bit of a feeling out in Washington that some of those ambitions might change, and that NASA might take a different role in terms of being more proactive about Earth observation and tracking climate and the environment from space, and that maybe the Moon to Mars efforts would be deprioritized, perhaps. Today we saw a fairly clear signal that the Artemis, the Moon to Mars missions, will continue to be something that NASA and the government will continue to endorse and be supportive of, which is really good to hear. In terms of my interactions with industry, no one had given up any hope that space would continue to be very much a priority. Investments are being made. Contracts are being very important contracts are being handed both in the US but also in places like Australia. There's a very big satellite contract in Australia called 9102 that a lot of companies are quite interested in, that we expect will help us build a world-class ecosystem, which is part of my job. So I think space will continue to be it, even in the pandemic. When a lot of businesses suffered, space remained in full working order. Companies remain active about making plans, commitments, winning work, delivering products and launches. We saw SpaceX take the first commercially flown crew to the ISS in the midst of a pandemic. So space is very, very attractive sector for regardless of how you look at the world.
I would say also that, space has really got a foundational or a fundamental role in all of the top 4 priorities for the Biden administration. I mean, certainly for climate change and Earth observation, but also for things like COVID and supply chain. I mean, certainly, space allows us to keep track of a lot of that. The economy and, the space economy drives a lot of things that we sometimes don't even think of as being part of the space economy. Things like GPS and applications that use those kind of location services and, tracking and all kinds of things like that. And even when you look at how to constructively address systemic racism, certainly space could use more diversity, but there's the ability to help build a knowledge economy and a diverse workplace like Denisse has, but one that also has skills for the future. And so space has got a role in a lot of these priorities. And I think the last point I want to make is that space it's for the benefit of all humankind. And if ever there was something that was unifying and something that really, wasn't partisan at all, it would be something that was for the benefit of all mankind. I think that's one of the things that really connects a lot of us that work in the space industry, is because it is aspirational and we connect with the highest parts of ourselves. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Denisse, anything else on that before I start opening it up to some of the great questions that are in the chat?
Diane said it beautifully. That was beautifully said. I can't even add to that. I was reading some of the questions. I wanted to get back. Natalie asked a question about non-STEM majors inside of space exploration. And I know that usually when you hear about space exploration, you see the engineers, you see the astronauts, but what you don't see is the thousands of support people behind them. There are so many opportunities to be involved in the Space Exploration Initiative without being a STEM major. Communications is huge, law is huge. I mean, if you could just go to either nasa.gov and look at their job openings, or even Blue Origin, there is a huge foundation in which all these innovations stand, and that is on the shoulder of non-STEM majors. So please, 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 if you're curious, if you're passionate, if you want to keep expanding the breadth of human exploration, don't think that you're limited because you're not studying engineering. There's so many opportunities there for you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Denise. Actually, I'm going to jump on that because I do get asked that question a lot by FIU students and others. And I fully endorse what you're saying. So the one great thing about space is that it is incredibly inclusive. You can kind of come as you are. So you can be an engineer, certainly, and there's plenty of roles and jobs for those. You can be a lawyer, and we have a great example of one here. But also, we talked about these spectrum regulations. These are very important, costly things and important pain points for companies that need solving. And so if you're really, really good at finding loopholes in contracts, legal loopholes, understanding regulation, working within regulation to streamline processes, huge opportunities in the private sector, but also in government. Because a lot of governments, including Australia, are reviewing some of the regulations to make them more streamlined, as we talked about earlier, and more inclusive for companies. There are opportunities if you happen to be a great writer, because space is a wonderful story to be told. There are opportunities if you're in international relations. We talked about the alliances that are being built and how partnerships happen. So there's opportunities for across so many fields. That's one of the things I also love about space.
Yeah, Santiago, I knew you were going to be eager to answer that question as soon as I saw it typed in, and I appreciate you doing so. Diane, anything else on non-STEM careers?
Well,
Obviously,
I'm a great example of a person who's not an engineer, but I've been working in space for a long, long time. And I've also put together cross-disciplinary programs at a couple of different universities to help, you know, draw those students in and have engineers work with lawyers, work with policy students, because there really is. I mean, there's room for project managers. There's going to be chefs. Ultimately, we'll need chefs when we're settling in different places in space, and certainly materials engineers, et cetera. Those are the obvious things, but everything that we include in the ecosystem for any kind of a place where humans live and work, that will be important to the space economy. At the Department of Commerce last year, we one of our bureaus, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, did a study where they embarked upon trying to better quantify just what we mean when we say the space economy, because we've been talking about, you know, the $1 trillion space economy for a while, but what does it include? And traditionally, we always thought of it like the launch community and the telecommunications and Earth observation, but there's so much more. Like, you know, there's so many trickle down applications. And then there's even things that are going on the ground, like there's a whole space safety industry that's starting to really, you know, bubble up, and it's doing all sorts of things with algorithms and AI and machine learning, and there's a whole cybersecurity aspect to things. So Gus, Santiago's right. It's diverse, and if you have a love for space, just show up.
Yeah, and even within, I'll just share a little bit, because I work with the U.S. government quite a bit. I don't work for it, but with it. A lot of people think space must mean NASA, but it means a lot of different agencies. So if you're negotiating export control treaties that might allow US technology to launch out of foreign soil, then you might want to work for the State Department, because those are negotiated at that level. The FCC has a lot to say about regulation and making space more usable for industry. The regulator for the space travel for air, what's it called? The FAA.
Yes.
The FAA has a big role to play. Yeah. Department of Defense has a big role to play. So there are Department of Commerce immense role in space, particularly of late. So there's so many different departments and agencies you could choose to work in this sector, that it isn't just any one employer, and if you go all in for NASA and you don't get in, your career is finished. It's far from the case.
Really, I have to tell you, the last couple of years, the most constructive work we've done, and a lot of those space policy directives that you saw, particularly in the last few months, come out in like a flurry. But that represents a whole of government approach to things, because Santiago is right. I mean, there's a whole lot of us, and we all have a different piece of the elephant, and that's another example of the kind of collaboration and cooperation that space really has come to embody, both domestically but also internationally.
So I love you three as a panel for monitoring and even responding to questions that are already in the chat. I want to give you all a chance to see and hear from some of our students. So I'm going to call on a few other folks that have some great questions lined up in the chat. And so while we're on the topic of careers, Valeria has a kind of career-oriented question. And I'm going to take my moderator's privilege to put Valeria on the spot a little and say that we had this one-on-one career conversation not too long ago where she told me all the things she wanted to do as a career, and then said, but her true passion and interest is space, thinking it was separate from career. And I was like, well, actually, maybe that can be something that's part of your career after all. So Valeria, introduce yourself to this great group and tell them your question.
Hi, how are you? I'm Valeria. I'm a graduate student at FIU, and I'm doing global affairs. Like Eric said, I love development studies, but I believe that if I was able to do math, I would have done, engineer or astronomy, but I'm really good at writing, so math is not my field. It was more a generic question, and it's just because I'm new to this. In my head, I never thought about space policy. And then when Eric mentioned it, I was very intrigued because I was like, this is something that I can do, and I'm interested. And why were your major interests that led you to work for space policy? I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It worked.
It's like probably Santiago and Diane can answer it because Denisse.
She's actually good at the math.
Yeah, you can maybe teach me.
I can I can actually take that because one of the things, one of the prompts for this session that I was given was how did FIU get you help you get to where you are? And I think actually writing is something that I really crafted at FIU. I've had some incredible literature professors, teachers, Denisse, the great novelist, being from FIU. There's a great tradition there. And writing has really been something that I use daily in my space work. Because it is a story that needs to be told. And so being able to influence people is a superpower. And you still have to influence people in writing. So a lot. Building networks, getting people introduced, getting people who may not know each other that you believe have a reason to meet is something that I'm quite good at, being this conduit. So I would say writing and being this conduit are two skills that have really allowed me to build a nice reputation in the space community. And I should note, the space community is actually quite small. And so once you are in it, there's a lot of momentum that gets generated, and you build networks pretty quickly if you find a way to where you can add value to people and be of service to them. I never expect to get anything out of anybody. I always try to be the one who adds the most value if I can. So I think that's what I would say for now. But I'm happy to have a conversation offline if you're interested in just.
Oh, absolutely.
If I can bring to your attention, there are actually groups that will help hook you up with other people that have a deep and abiding love of space, and policy looks like their point of entry. And I had a long convoluted, I wanted to be an astronaut, but I couldn't see for beans. And at the time that I wanted to be an astronaut, they didn't even have women jet pilots and fighter pilots. So it was really just a deal breaker. However, years later, circuitously, I knew I was going to law school, and I had been the beneficiary of some really good things, and I wanted to do something to give back, and I found space law. So you find your way. So there's something called Space Generation Advisory Council. sgac.com. And they do have like a space law and I think also a space policy interest group. You can find them. It's free to join if you're like from 18 to 35. Everybody that's taken their afternoon to come and listen to this has enough interest that you should be joining Space Gen. And it's a fantastic organization with thousands of people like yourself all over the world. There's also a number of organizations, non-governmental organizations that will, when we go back to after, post-COVID times and we all get to go back to conferences and all, they sometimes support students. They do writing competitions to help you get to conferences because Santiago is right. Networking is a skill that you will, not only will you need, but you will also be able to really hone it. So that's Secure World Foundation. And if you go to Secure World Foundation, just Google it, they'll bring you up. And if you do the drop-down menus on the top, you'll see when they have competitions and things. And this is a real good way for you to like start building your network. And now I'll shut up.
No, I love it. Like this conversation has, because I always thought, like I said, like space was only for engineers and math, and I definitely don't fit into that. And then I found this and I was very intrigued. And then what you guys described is mainly what I get taught in my major or in my, in my master's degree. And writing and like being this outgoing person able to like network, it seems very important, but I just want to emphasize that is not only in like political science or international relations, but practically in every major, it is always important to know even how to write in like mainly networking. Thank you for, putting these, organizations and telling me where to go, because I was very, very interested. And that was going to be my next question. What are the resources that I can potentially have? I don't know, probably internships, but I can probably ask these questions offline if I'm able to get in contact with any of you guys. But I appreciate it. Thank you very much. This has been awesome.
Yeah, I would add one thing. I'm not a mathematician, but I'm not afraid of math, and I'm not afraid of physics. And there are times, usually 99.999% of the time I'm at any kind of meeting within the space community, I'm clearly the dumbest person at the table, which is actually great. It's actually a great thing, but it does put a lot of responsibility on you to do a lot of homework. And so I do spend a lot of time, looking at math and astrophysics and asking questions and learning quite a bit about it, because it helps me be better at my job anyways. So this is not to excuse anyone from spending time with the STEM fields. You still need it, but you don't have to be kind of certified in it in order to function in the space community.
I also want to add to that resources. So if the other thing I want to encourage you guys to do is to go on LinkedIn. It is single-handedly the most important tool that you can have right now as a student. I need you to go and I need you to find me. My name is right there, Denisse Aranda, and just shoot me a message and say, hey, Denisse, I was at a session today, and I will accept you immediately. And you can go through my friends. Once you're my first connection, go through my friends. I've got astronauts on there. I've got people from all over the spec field. And once we have a connection, it is more easy for you to connect with them. Secondly, for my non-STEM majors, if you find yourself in a situation where you're reading something technical and you're just like, I don't understand what that is, reach out to me. I got you. Listen, I'm serious. I am 100% about paying it forward. Not only that, I can take these really complex things and talk about it in a much simpler way. That is a gift that I've been training for years to do. I do outreach all the time. If you have a question, I will gladly pay it forward. Message me on LinkedIn. I always respond.
And curveball.
Yeah. Eric, there was a question in the chat. I was wondering if we have time for me to address it. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'd actually like to see if, I'll let you pick it out. I'd like to see if whoever asked it can come on and ask it so you get to see them if they're.
Oh, I think we're talking about the same question. I was going to answer Natalie's question.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, is that okay, Natalie? Do you want to ask it or do you want me to read it for you? She had a question about biology. And I think you're a biology student right now. So,
Natalia, are you on there?
Wait, you're talking about me?
Yes, ma'am. I'm talking about you.
Really? It was just a comment.
Yeah, but a really cool comment.
There's a Natalie. There's a Natalie and there's Natalia. I'm sorry.
Oh, Natalia. I apologize.
I would love to hear. I was actually thinking in my head, everyone's talking about non-STEM, but then I'm STEM.
I see you.
Yes. Go ahead. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Okay, so she was asking about biology, and I am uniquely qualified to answer this question. And I'm actually so excited you asked specifically about biology. So I mentioned that I am the principal contamination control engineer for the heavy lift vehicle for Blue Origin called New Glenn. Before my years at NASA, I didn't even know what that means. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that none of you guys know what it means, because it's a very specific role in space. And the contamination control and planetary protection means that we make engineering decisions to protect outer space from Earth. And I want you to take a second and think about what I just said. So we are sending lunar rovers to land on the surface of Mars. We are sending rovers and probes to the surface of all these other planets, right? And most of them are searching for signs of life. They're searching for signs of water. And really, we're looking for organic compounds to help us understand how the universe was created. Could you imagine how embarrassing it would be for us if we are in Mars and we have our drill and we take samples and we do a chemistry and we have this big press release and we said, guys, we found this organic compounds. And then you come to find that it was Natalia and I in the clean room that left behind our hair or our skin cells, and it made its way to the spacecraft across space, landed on the surface, and now we have a tainted sample. It is such a hard problem. I've dedicated my career to doing molecular and particulate contamination. Not only that, my master's in surface chemistry means that I can understand how materials degrade in space, and they do all kinds of funky things when they're in vacuum, when they have atomic oxygen. So your question about biology is huge. There's one aspect that I just discussed, which is planetary protection. How do we take samples from outer space and quantify whether they're extraterrestrial life, whether we bring them from Earth and contaminate the surface, and how do we build instruments to be able to detect the difference between them? That's huge. So that's on that side. And then you have the whole human exploration piece. So there are biologists at Johnson Space Flight Center who develop the astronaut food that if you guys ever had like that freeze-dried ice cream that you can buy at stores sometimes, there's biologists that develop that. They are the ones that take the human body, put them in high G acceleration forces and see how that affects it. How do the bones break down when you're in low Earth gravity? How does that affect when you have a 2.5-year trajectory to Mars? What does that mean to have a human live and work in outer space? There is this beautiful world that's inside this scope of biology that's not talked about enough, but it is beautiful. Send me a message. I can talk about it more at length, but it is an awesome, awesome field.
Yeah, and then there's
Thank you
also
so much.
there's also space medicine, of course, and how do bacteria behave in microgravity, and great research on even vaccines and
that's what I was gonna say. Yeah.
and behave in space, and so quite a lot about it, but I do believe it's going to get quite hot and topical within the next few years.
I'm going to direct you also, you can look up the fact that there was a planetary protection strategy that we all worked together in that whole of government way that I described before to come up with ways to protect against the forward contamination, which is what Denisse is talking about, and then also the backward contamination where you bring something from outer space and you bring it back and infect Earth. So we are, in the government, we're working on that right now. So I'm going to actually reach out to you on LinkedIn, Denisse, because I want to pick your brain.
Definitely, absolutely. I was a center rep for NASA Alumni Research Center, and I'm currently the rep for Blue Origin. It is a passion of mine and what I did in graduate school, so anytime.
Don't tell all the other panels that I've hosted in the past year, but I think this is my favorite panel of 3 people. The enthusiasm and expertise and the care for students here is unparalleled. The questions that I see pending in the chat are all from, by the way, like FIU and DC rockstar dedicated students who have been coming to our programs for a year plus now. So I want to get through as many of them as possible. These are all students I know very well. I'm glad to see them here. Alejandro had a question about some priorities. Alejandro, you still on to ask that?
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Hey, everybody.
Hey, Alejandro, good to see you.
Nice to see you, Santiago. So I very happy to be here, and thank you to all the panelists for your enthusiasm and for sharing all this knowledge. I'm approaching the space industry as someone that has a very diverse set of interests that I don't necessarily know where to put them all. I was leaning in the direction of management consulting, but I'm like, oh, well, that everyone does that. Let me see if I can try something new. So I'm just very happy to be here, and I'm just trying to think about space from a kind of an economic point of view, and I'm currently studying a master's degree in sustainable development, pretty much. So I just want to kind of learn a little bit about how, as the space industry continues to grow, how we can maybe channel that growth in a way where we can address sustainability here where we live, and also to provide greater economic opportunity to technical professionals such as engineers, but also to more traditional blue collar workers that may be able to learn specialized skills in manufacturing different equipment that goes into space. So happy to repeat any part. I know it's a little bit lengthy, but thank you again all for the organizing this. I appreciate it.
So yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to ask Alejandro, what specifically, what is the main thing you want to get out of your question?
The main thing, the main thing that I want to get out of the question is, how is the space industry taking into account existing sustainability goals, such as the UN sustainability goals for 2030?
Okay, got it.
Well, I'm gonna jump on that because I was part of the work at the United Nations Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. We were working on long-term sustainability guidelines for space activities for almost 10 years. And in 2019, we finally got them adopted by the General Assembly. So there are 21 guidelines for sustainable activities in space. There's a preamble, there's a definition of what space sustainability is. And one of the expert groups, expert group A, there were four, actually focused upon sustainable activities on Earth that space supported. But then there was another one that dealt with, the sustainability of the orbital domains. And that's what my office has been working on a lot, is the space situational awareness and the space traffic management, and in keeping helping to mitigate the creation of more debris, helping to mitigate the effects of debris. We have better analytics and we know where things are, and we're able to give out actionable warnings, and the role that DoD is doing. But there's a whole lot of private companies that they're building on that. So my suggestion to you, because I also kind of heard that you would like to know how to find some of these different kinds of companies that are starting to embark on looking at space and how it can feed into sustainable activities here on Earth, but also how we can make those activities in space that are supporting those sustainable activities on Earth more sustainable themselves. And I would suggest to you to look into some of the accelerators, some of like the startup community, because, and in fact, there's a fantastic conference that happens not last year, and maybe this year it will or not, but it's up by where Denisse is located. It's called New Space, and it's fantastic because it's all people with like really almost fringe but amazing ideas. And there's a whole venture capital community that understands the different kinds of timelines and the different kinds of business models that space is looking at. So I think you'll find your tribe there.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Howard. I really appreciate that. I'm going to look into them. And Space Jam too.
And look up the long-term sustainability guidelines. It's only 21 of them. It won't take you a long time to read them.
Perfect.
Santiago and Diane, I'm going to ask you now, do you both have hard stops at 3, or are either of you able to stay on for 10 more minutes perhaps?
If the discussion merits, I'm happy to stay on for another 10 minutes, sure.
Yes, oh yeah, 10 minutes I can, yeah, let me check my schedule real fast to make sure nothing happened in the time that I was here, but.
Yeah, an hour's often enough for these, but with all of your passions and the students' great questions, this is a really great one. So I'm going to try to get a few more of these questions in here, and I might be going a little out of order, but I know this question is very important to Rose, and so I'm gonna call on Rose next. Rose, are you still there? Or if you're at work, you can chat that. You want me to read it for you? All right. we'll see if we'll confirm she's there because I can ask her for her, but I want to make sure that she's okay. Yeah, she wants me to ask it for her. She might be at work. I pay her interns here in DC. So Rose is a recent graduate of FIU's MFA in Creative Writing program. She heard some of you, particularly Dr. Howard and Santiago, mentioned writing as a good skill for the space industry. She wants to know, she says, Dr. Howard, you mentioned a few organizations to join to build my skills. As a writer, what's the best way to get into the space industry as a writer? So on top of it being a good skill, specific ways a writer might be able to get into the industry.
Start writing and start researching ideas, start thinking. That's it. Just start writing, start doing it, submit things. There's so much available online, you know, particularly with Creative Commons now. It's not even behind paywalls, a lot of it. Start reading and write down your ideas. Start to develop, you know, put together your arguments, come up with some ideas, submit them. The more you write, the better you get. But do it.
And take a look at how the space community likes to communicate. So there's some great examples out there. I really like the Axios, AXIOS model. Brevity is premium. I actually have now started crafting a lot of my emails to influence clients and stakeholders using the kind of an Axios-like template where the main point of what I'm trying to communicate is first, and then the background. I don't like to read emails that read like scrolls, you know, that if you were to print them out, there'd be like 6 pages and you don't know where the main point is. So the military has this thing of leading with the most important point. Usually that's a task or an ask of someone, and you lead with that. So become a great writer doesn't mean becoming a very lengthy one. It actually means learning to communicate concisely and to the point. I think Mark Twain said, I wrote to you a big kind of letter because I didn't have the time to go short. Because writing concise emails takes a long time. It takes a lot of practice. So practice how to write persuasively and concisely. Other great publications out there are Space News. There is a great reporter that covers space industry for the Washington Post named Chris Davenport. If you can find his work, he publishes about once or twice a week on the Washington Post. Great writer. He's got a book called Space Barons, which talks about Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and their quest for space. So learn how he writes, how he communicates, and there's plenty of jobs you can be. You can work for the State Department writing cables, or you can work for the Department of Commerce. You could work for the Washington Post, Space News. I mean, there's plenty of publications out there covering space. It is only going to get hotter. It is not the easiest field because it is quite technical. So if you can communicate concisely and clearly technical materials, then there's going to be opportunities out there.
And I just want to add to that too, there is a subset of writing called technical writing. You can get your master's degree in it, or you can get on-the-job training. I have a couple of colleagues that work on technical writing, and their job is kind of interesting too. You know, you hear about companies like Blue or Lockheed Martin winning these bids, contracts, to do human landers, to do this type of work. Well, we have to bid for that, and we have to submit a proposal. And these are some very intricate documents where we have to talk about the capabilities of the launch vehicle, a lot of technical aspects to it, and mostly why is our design better than everybody else's design. And behind that proposal is a team of technical writers who are not engineers themselves, but they interface with the technical authorities on this to create and shape that document. It's actually a really interesting field. I don't know if it's creative in the way that you intend it to be, but there's definitely a really beautiful Venn diagram there of creative writing and understanding the space exploration and using that persuasive power that Santiago was talking about to win a bid or a contract.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that. I did not mention that, but I had meant to. I actually spent a year before I got into the space and government sector working on winning capture contracts for a cybersecurity company with government contracts. So I really learned this technical writing and how to communicate with engineers and put things in a way that answered the requests of the government entity that was tendering the work, because these are massive multi-million or more, even sometimes multi-billion-dollar contracts. So if you can influence and win work with your writing, huge opportunities there as well.
So to keep the focus on to prioritize career-oriented questions and to be a little out of order here, Taylor has one that, speaking of LinkedIn, I was on Denisse's LinkedIn earlier, and I know this is one that I really want to hear her answer because of what I saw on her LinkedIn.
Yes.
Taylor, are you available to ask that question directly?
Yeah, I am. So hi everyone, I'm Janae. I'm a STEM education major, well, doctoral student. And so my question is around positions for like science educators in the field. I know that there are like curriculum developers who work with NASA, but I'm more so interested in positions where I'm sort of like a liaison, connecting the work that is being done in the industry to the classroom. And just for a quick example, I think about during my undergrad, so I did my undergrad in physics. I worked on projects where I basically, collaborated with defense scientists working with the army, things like that. And so we developed projects that could be used by soldiers. And so we saw the work that we were doing as something that is like practical and, in the field. So I'm just wondering about positions like that in the space industry.
Oh yeah, I got this. Taylor, thank you so much for that question. I'm very passionate about K through 12 education. I fundamentally believe that when it comes to getting people who are interested in space exploration to have avenues to pursue those careers, the earlier we start, the better. So I'm all about exposure all the time. The first thing I want you to do is connect with me on LinkedIn, Taylor. Take a look at some of the work experience. I don't know if we have time to go through all of it, but I did work with the Department of Education within NASA Langley to do some of the K through 12 outreach. So there are government employees who do nothing but, as you just mentioned, develop the curriculum, but they also are a bridge to K through 12 in classroom teachers, where we are taking the work that we were doing at NASA and translating that to hands-on activities and STEM engagement in K through 12 classrooms. So that's one really important piece. Also, and by the way, every single NASA center has a branch like this, and they're also overseen by headquarters. They have a really good budget to do really amazing things. On the private side here at Blue Origin, I am currently working with their K through 12 and university relations folks, because they also have a branch of outreach to reach out to K through 12 and do the types of activities that you were discussing. And then I also have a nonprofit that I work with that we can talk about later. And just a fun fact about Blue Origin. So I personally work on the New Glenn rocket, but we have another rocket called New Shepard who does suborbital flight. If you haven't seen it, we saw a lot. We had a launch last month. It was really exciting. We have a branch of Blue Origin, which is called Club for Space. They are a nonprofit sector that we partner with. And what we've done is we've asked students from K through 12 to draw these little postcards about what they believe their future for space exploration is. And then they ship that to our capsule, to our launch vehicle. We put it in there, we send it to space. We take the postcards that the kids drew back from space and we ship it back to them with a certificate that said your postcard has been to space and back. Like, imagine if you're in second grade and you drew something that went to space and back and you get to hang it. Like, there's so many opportunities for engagement. We can talk offline, or anybody who's interested, but please reach out to me. There's so many opportunities there.
Yeah, what two that I would add, just from experience, are Space Camp in Huntsville, Alabama, do great work. And then there is the Challenger Center, which is based out of Washington, D.C., but they've got centers across the country and increasingly around the world. And they do great work. They team up with NASA formally. Great work, great programs for K through 12 education in space and STEM, really.
There's even international initiatives that the things that Denisse and Santiago were talking about feed into, like World Space Week, which collects these kinds of initiatives all over the planet and can help hook you up. And they're based in Vienna. And again, if you Google it, you'll find it, World Space Week. There's a lot.
And increasingly, even the big conferences, industry conferences, I know we're not doing those in COVID times, but they do have, a lot of them have K through 12 days. So for example, one of the big the biggest conferences in the space calendar, and it rotates around the world every year, is called the IAC. I think it's International Astronautics Congress, IAC, and they have a day that is dedicated to K through 12. So even I know that they're trying to do more around that space. So even connecting with some of the big conference organizers and helping shape the K through 12 program could be an opportunity that is maybe untapped or not yet optimized.
So I know we can't stay here forever as much as I would enjoy it. I know we didn't get to all of the questions, though everyone I didn't call on is someone that I know, and I know they'll forgive me. And I think we did a good job at staying focused on the career-oriented questions, which was the overarching goal of this. So I do thank all the great students for question. I thank our great panelists for being here. And I'll ask them to close on any note they want to leave that to our students that is an FIU specific note. Denisse and Santiago, you went to FIU. Dr. Howard, you hail from South Florida yourself. Or to this group of talented, dedicated, prepared Miamians that ultimately come from all over looking to get in this sort of thing. Closing remark to FIU Panthers.
I might jump in and just say, those of us who have a strong roots in South Florida or the state of Florida are very, very lucky. We come from really a space ecosystem that is quite unique and strong. So try to build networks even within Florida, and there are great places. Space Florida is a state government entity that does a lot of great work to help grow a Florida space community. We've got great universities. We've got, FIU is doing quite a bit, Embry-Riddle, just UCF. Many companies have operations in the state. So don't, I know a lot of times we think the grass is greener elsewhere, but Florida is just an incredible space ecosystem, and see if how you can leverage that.
And maybe by next year, we can do a Yuri's night down here. Seriously. I mean, maybe by then we can, so.
Maybe, hopefully.
Or maybe the year after. But.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I would just like to say that feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. And again, like really, it's a really powerful tool. And don't be shy. Those of us that are here is because we want to be here and we want to pay it forward. Behind all of us, there are people who helped us along the way, whether there be colleagues or mentors. For me, it was definitely the professors that I had at FIU. And so definitely want to pay it forward, and please reach out. We will help in any way that we can. If you get an opportunity to do internships, that is the most powerful thing in the world. If you need tips on how to get that work experience, because you need work experience to get an internship, but you need an internship to get work experience, it can be an endless loop. I got you, just come talk to me. And if you have a passion at all, there is a place for you. No matter what your major is, as you've heard from Santiago and Diane, no matter what you do or what you're good at, there is a place for you here in space exploration if you want it.
What she said.
Yeah. And something I tell myself all the time is make sure you spend a lot of time thinking about what the other party's pain points are and how you can help solve the problem. Plenty of people make the mistake of telling me how great they are, and they never take the time to understand what I might need out of the relationship. So yeah, that goes without saying, but it's crucially important, particularly in space where everyone has incredible challenges and problems that we need to solve.
I love that. Fantastic thought. Denisse, Santiago, Diane, thank you so much. I'm in such a good mood from this. I appreciate you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.
It's been great.
Yeah, space is awesome.
Thank you.
All right.
Space is the place.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
It is.
Thank you so much. Bye.